Hi, I'm Richard Gottehrer. I was a songwriter. I haven't been a songwriter for a long time. The truth is, I started in the business as a songwriter in the early middle 60s. That was the heyday of the songwriter. Had I continued on that path instead of the wayward path that I followed, I would have been a gazillionaire many times over, because I actually participated in writing hit songs that lasted, hit songs that have meaning across the generations. Well, first I started writing songs myself, and one of the songs I wrote myself when I was a kid, I was 16 years old, I idolized Jerry Lee Lewis. I wrote this song, and eventually I got to meet him, and he recorded it. And it was sort of semi-paraphrasing a Great Balls of Fire, and it was called I'm on Fire. And it was a real thrill. So it shows you where the thrill comes from. It's not always in the hit, it's in the doing of it and then the sharing of it. So being a songwriter is a great thing. Well, I wrote some songs, I continued by myself a little bit, and then in my travels through the, quote, Brill building, I encountered two other guys who were songwriters, Bob Feldman and Jerry Goldstein, and we became a writing team. Now, there were writing teams, writing songs to order for artists who would then record them. Publishers would engage us. They would then take the songs to these artists who were coming up for recording. We would create the demos. Very often the demos were followed pretty much verbatim, and that became the record. We had several hits with Freddie Cannon, Bobby V. These were successful artists of their time in the early mid-60s. And we wrote other, I thought, great songs for a lot of other artists that were recording at the time. Our big hits came a little bit later. When I say a little later, I mean 2 years later from when we started. We learned to be producers by making demos. So the song and the songwriting gave us the opportunity to spend time in studios. And by virtue of that, we started thinking, well, we could make recordings of our songs as good or better than the people at record companies doing it. So why don't we find some artists and record our songs? We put together a group, a female vocal group, who had a few hit records before we met them, but we channeled them in a little different direction. The group was called the Angels, and the song we wrote for them was My Boyfriend's Back. My Boyfriend's Back is a song that, for better or worse, seems to represent this girl group period that began in the early 60s and followed through for a few more years with the great Phil Spector records, the Crystals, the Ronettes. The Angels had this one huge record, a couple of other follow-up records, but then it sort of fizzled for them. After the Angels, as we continued producing, we could no longer write songs to order for girl groups or for other people, because along came the Beatles, the Stones, the, quote, British invasion of the middle 1960s, and the whole business shifted. Prior to that, let me go back and tell you a little bit about what it was like in New York. I think it's probably still similar in Nashville, where the song is king and people sit around in cubicles, little studios, in rooms all day and just write songs. Well, if you can imagine, that's what New York was like in the early 60s, early to mid 60s, maybe a 3 to 5 year period. Publishers were engaging young songwriters. I was 20 when I started, and they would engage us, give us assignments. We would sit in a room with a piano, and then we'd create a song that would suit that artist. The area that all this happened in was around Broadway and 7th Avenue, mostly in two buildings, 1650 Broadway, which is still there and still a center for music, and the Brill Building. That was a hotbed of creative writing. So publishers would find young writers like us that were born into the generation of rock and roll and channeled our experience to artists that were making records in a traditional sense. Now, that was an explosive thing for about 5 years. Then along comes the Beatles, and they start writing their songs. Remember, the Beatles didn't write any of their earlier songs. They covered songs. Then they started writing simplistic songs. Then the songs got more complex, and then everybody followed them. So let me take you from there to 1965. And we're starting to run out of money, so we decided, well, we can also be an artist. So not only were we producing and writing songs, we started performing. Well, we didn't perform very much, but we had the ability to perform if we chose to. So we made a record, and on this particular record, it was a cover of a standard song done with a ska beat. In the middle of the song was a narration. And one of my partners, Bob Feldman, narrated it with a fake English accent. A little love, love, what slowly goes and goes, love, more on that comes and goes, love, that's all I want from you. And he just narrated it that way. Well, we had connections with radio stations, and we sent the record around. It was on a small label called Swan. That's who we licensed it to. And we got a call from a DJ that we knew in Virginia Beach, Virginia. And that's how it was in those days, too. You could take a song or a record, and you could break it in one town, and then it would spread from area to area. So he said, listen, I think I can make this record #1 in Virginia. If you guys would come down here and perform, we're having a big show. And he said, sure, we'll do it. He says, but the only thing is, because of the narration, nobody is going to accept you as pure white Jewish kids from New York. I said, well, what do they think? He said, well, you know, sounds like you're English. The kids think, I said, no, we can't be English. So we have to be something. So we thought about it, and we became Australian. And this is the truth. I'm going to show this to you. The song wasn't this song at the time, but we became Australian, eventually created this song, I Want Candy, dressed up in these outfits, which are zebra skins, African war drums. The show began with spears, and we talked with Australian accents, like, right you all mate. That's all, right you all mate. But this song, I Want Candy, changed everything. It became a hit, but not only a hit, it crossed generations, gets licensed over and over again as sync for sync, advertising, to make the point that is probably the point of this and addressing writers, people in bands and songwriting, is that here's a song from 1965 with a derivative, Bo Diddley-ish kind of beat that captured the imagination and crosses the generations and earns more money today than it did when it was a hit. So if you write songs, if you own copyrights, if you represent copyrights, these things have value far beyond the initial intention. We never expected this when the song was done. And it's a catchy song, but there's no moment of brilliance. You know, it's got a good beat. It's got a good melody. The record was great. It's been a hit 3 or 4 times, but used in movies, used in advertising over and over again. So that's basically the message, you know. And if you wonder what happened to me after I stopped writing songs, and believe it or not, I stopped writing songs in 1960. I stopped writing songs in maybe 1966, 1967. Occasionally would write a song, and get something done with it. But I focused on producing, purely on producing. But it was the songwriting that got me to that position. And I used the knowledge of being a good songwriter to interpret other people's songs and help them make it better as a producer. I produced many early punk artists, most prominently Blondie, the first two Blondie albums. And yes, I did help them with their songs, but their songs were great. They were really great songwriters. A classic song, Richard Hell, Blank Generation. And I found material for a wonderful, legendary, wonderfully voiced rockabilly singer, Robert Gordon. I started Sire Records with Seymour Stein. And both of us, if you would talk to Seymour, he would say the same thing, that it's the song that makes the difference. You can be an interesting artist, but without that song, you're not so interesting. So it's the song, again, I'll keep hammering that, whether you write it, produce it, or have anything at all to do with the business. It's the song that matters. I continued on and I produced the early Go-Go's records. We got the beat, and I worked with an amazing songwriter, and we had a big hit record, Joan Armatrading. Now there's another serious side to songwriting that's a little different than just this contemporary pop stuff. Her songs had a richer and deeper, I thought, a richer and deeper feeling and meaning. But she even looked back to the period of the 60s to draw the sense of pop music into this more meaningful, what I call more meaningful, expressive field of singer-songwriting. From Sire Records, went on to do many other things and produced tons of other artists, and that's what I did until in 1997, with a new partner, Scott Cohn and I, came upon the idea of starting a company that serviced the needs of independent artists on the internet. Even prior to broadband, we were doing this. We're talking about 1997. Scott and I started a company called The Orchard. The Orchard grew very quickly, enabling independent artists to have access to distribution, mass distribution, that previously was never available to them. Distribution was a tired, very rote process of manufacturing, moving product from one place to another. We set it up so it could be handled through our channels and sold on the internet stores. From there, it was a very short step to realize that the next moment of change was going to be digital. And we anticipated digital by, we anticipated iTunes, which was the really main burst of digital distribution and sales of music on the internet, by 6 years. So we had been dealing in digital music since 1997. The Orchard now is a company with about 2.5 million titles under license, offices in 25 countries, and it's a very, very successful revenue-generating business. But its goal and its mission is still very much the same. How can you make more and more music that comes from the independent community, independent labels now, even more so than independent artists, because we're more label-centric now. But how can you make that available in more and more places? Basically, we've built a company that has access to nearly 700 digital retail outlets. We also have a physical channel now where we sell our music physically. We support sync and advertising placement. We have a marketing division. We do things that distributors never did. We cross into the area of what record companies did, and we have a licensing entity. And in context of that, we have a partnership with an interesting company you might have heard of, RightsFlow. That comes out of my relationship with Patrick Sullivan, who started RightsFlow. We worked together at the Orchard, and it all comes full circle. You know, you do good things, you do good work, you continue to move forward, you meet people with talent, and that's it. The music business, in a nutshell, is, in my experience, a bit of talent and a lot of luck, and get connected with people that can give you that extra leg up and give you the advantage of helping you with the formalities that a creative person really shouldn't be involved with.